Hey there, I'm Thea Dudley, also known as the Credit Overlord, and welcome to LBM Talks Credit. We are the only podcast that talks trade credit in the lumber and building material space. Never miss an episode, stay tuned, and we're glad you're here. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of LBM Talks Credit. I'm Thea Dudley, your host, also known as the Credit Overlord, and today we are talking about succession planning. And I know when people talk about succession planning, everybody thinks it's that, whoever's sitting at the top, it's like, okay, what's going to happen when you move on, sell, pass away, however you leave the business. But we rarely think about what about departmental wise and what does that look like? So my friend Sam Brownell is here to talk to us about succession planning and what that really means. So Sam, thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, sure, Thea. This is great. Looking forward to the conversation. And I think you already brought up one important point, which is you've got to look beyond the owner when you start thinking about succession planning.
Why do you think most people don't?
Yeah, it's one of those things. So succession planning is one of those things that you're only going to do it once typically, right? We're in an industry where we're not talking about serial entrepreneurs. Nobody's starting up a lumber yard and selling it off and then going and starting up another one and selling that one off and on again. And so the owner typically doesn't really know what they're getting into. And because it's new and because it's so all consuming, just dealing with them. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my family? I want to make sure that my company's there. I want to have a legacy. That it's very hard to look beyond just what's going on in that one silo. But of course, as we know, a company is more than just one person or even one department. And often what we find is these folks who are the owners who are leaving, most of the leadership across the different divisions are in that same age cohort. So they're probably going to leave at the same time.
Which then leaves the company in a world of hurt because you're like, okay. And I know one of the and this always irritated me when, I'm going to equate it to when you're dealing with family and you're talking about your will. And, I remember, asking my grandma at one point, it's like, so grandma, do you have a will? And she's like, well, I don't really care what happens after I die.
Yeah, right.
It's like, thanks, Nana. That's pretty not cool of you. It's like, okay, then you're leaving everybody to pick up these pieces. And so if you have this exodus, and typically you do see that when an owner and you guys have been together for a long time, they all decide to leave, they're like, well, when you retire, I'm going to retire. And then, you look backwards and you've got this whole group of people that are going, we don't really know how we're going to keep this place afloat. So then you have that dip back, and I call it the dip back, which is really irritating I've never seen it work super well. Usually it just frustrates everybody. Where, well, the outgoing crew is going to work, and I'm using air quotes, part-time, and help the other people. It's like, okay, your help is not awesome because you're retiring for a reason. And, those new people have to have a chance to put their stamp and figure things out moving forward. So, when you're talking about that, how do you sit down with an owner and say, okay, you might not be, let's say maybe your 10-year plan is, you're going to retire at this point or sell or whatever, but how are you prepping your departments? And, nobody ever thinks of the credit department because I don't, I don't know why. I don't know why they don't think of it. And it's your money. I don't know how you don't get it. It's like, how would you not want to go, okay, we can't put some newbie in there because they will just give money to everybody.
Right. Yeah.
So how do you start coaching on that? Or have you ever had to coach someone on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent point. And one of the first things that we talk about with any owner or ownership group that's thinking about a transition is there are three different parts to this. There's a leadership part, there's an ownership part, and there's a control part. And they can all go at once, but it's generally better if you do them in waves, starting with the leadership part. And that's really where what we coach owners to do is look around your business and look at those departments that are critical to your functioning, right? Yes, of course we've got purchasing, right? Of course, somebody's got to make deliveries. But I think you're hitting on a good point, which is somebody's got to collect the money. Right? Somebody's got to make sure that we get paid. And so oftentimes what a lot of people would consider as the back office, right? Again, to use the air quotes, it is something like the credit department, and so it often gets overlooked, as you said, because it doesn't seem as well. The sales guys are out there selling. Well, the delivery guy's got to, he's the interaction with our customers. If we don't purchase at the right level, how are we going to make the right margins? All those things are critical, and you need to look at those departments. But what we say is go around and look, what are the departments that you absolutely need to function? And then within those departments, who are the critical people? And oftentimes, this will bring up in an owner's head, well, geez, we've been relying on so and so for 35 years. I don't know what I would do without them. And that's then where you have a really good in to then start having the deeper conversation of, well, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So what are you going to do when that person goes home too? So when you sit down and let's say you were sitting down face to face with me and you're like, okay, Thea, you're kind of in the twilight years of your career. Who is your successor? And if that person can't name somebody, if they can't look at their department and say, well, this person has the capabilities, or if they're looking around going, well, I am the department. So,
Right.
when I'm out of here, it's like, don't deuces, I'm out. I mean,
Yep.
So how do you start? It's like, so then does it become more of, okay, what attributes does your successor need to have? And at what point do we need to bring them in? Because how are you going to train them? Because, like when I left Guardian, I'd been there for 16 years, but I'd had a team that had been with me for a really long time. There had been a lot of people we had been together for a long time.
Right.
So you had a good basis and you had a pool to select from. But if you don't have that, I mean, how do you start coaching people through that?
Yeah. No, I think you bring up there are two parts to this, right? One is, are there other people in the department? And if so, then it's a little bit different, because then you can start looking around and saying who might possess the necessary skills. But I think in either case, the starting point has to be, what are the skills? What do people need to be in this position? And whether you're yourself or two people or 25 people, you've got to define what it is that makes this successful. And it may even be that I can't come in and I'm not going to replicate Thea. So maybe we need to decide, do we need two people? And how many people do we need? But we've got to define that baseline first, which is, what does this person actually need to be able to do? What are their skills, particularly their soft skills? Are they good with communication? And that's a huge one. If that person's really good with Excel spreadsheets, but they have trouble on the phone, or they can't think about, or problem solve, right? That could be another huge one, especially in the credit department. How are we going to get at this problem? How are we going to collect from this person? This person's always slow. Is there something else we need to do? So it's not necessarily having the answers. It's just, can they think through the problem? And then you're right. It's going to take some time, because you want to do two things. You want to give them a framework to work in, right? There are processes that you've developed, things that you know that work, things that you've done wrong, right? Pitfalls that you're gonna warn them about, and then also give them leeway to be able to explore and make it their own position too. So, and that's going to take time, right? And so and to go back to your example, if we're looking at 10 years, that's probably a good timeline, right? 7 to 10 years is probably a good timeline for getting somebody, training them, figuring out if they're the right fit. If they're not, you've got time to readjust. If you're doing this within a 2-year period, 2 years goes by like that, and then you could be in big trouble.
So that brings up another question, and I get this frequently, especially from like aspiring credit managers, as they're coming up and they're like, well, here's the challenge I have, is that I would like to be considered. The challenge that I have is the person who would be outgoing maybe hasn't quite picked a time, or they pick it and then they waffle. And then they come back with, well, maybe I'll be part-time. It's like, okay, whatever. And we talked about that part-time part before, where, when you're used to going to, like, if I decide, hey, I'm going to go part-time and I'm just going to be there to kind of, help. And my help just starts to hurt, because I'm people are used to coming to me. I'm going to deal with it different. The new person is trying to establish themselves, and maybe I'm not self-aware or strong enough, or, maybe it's just like, well, I kind of dig that everybody still comes to me.
Right.
So I'm not pushing them back and saying, well, did you go talk to, Cindy
Yeah.
over there? And, that's where I think a lot of that frustration comes in. So what do you do if you have somebody who, you're working with a team and you're saying, okay, we're starting this succession planning, and you might not know your exit date right now, but you need to have identified, how do you work through people who maybe aren't ready to come, I'm going to call it coming to terms with their mortality.
Sure.
How do you work those people through?
Yeah. No, I think that's an excellent question, because again, to get back to the why it's usually at the top, and that's the only thing that they think about, is because if I'm an exiting owner, generally there's going to be some type of financial incentive, so that if I am part-time or cutting back, I'm going to want to work hard. I'm still going to want to be there, but I'm also going to want to pass things off, because there's some type of tie, right? I'm buying the business from you, Thea, and you're going to pay me out from future cash flow. Well, geez, I better make sure that that cash flow is still there when I'm going forward, so that I can get paid. And that monetary incentive works at the ownership level. Lots of times at the individual department level, it's different, because you don't necessarily tie somebody's outgoing pay or last 6 months of pay to the performance of the next 12 months, right? That's generally not.
Wouldn't it be really cool though if you could? Because it would solve so much stuff. It's like, look, I need you to do these 3 things, or this
Right.
isn't happening. This pot of gold will not be yours.
Yes. Yeah. Right. We'd like to pay you this deferred compensation, but only if X, Y, Z. Yeah, that would be nice. But I do think here 2 things. If you're, as you brought up, the aspiring credit manager working up the chain, one of them really is to get an idea of what that succession planning looks like, so that you can manage up in a way. Hey, whether you have a good relationship with your boss, it may be a good time to sit down with them and say, hey, I think it's going to be great for this department if we can really come up with the steps. What are we going to do over the next 3 years, so that we make sure that what you have built continues to operate? It always helps to flatter people. You've done a great job, and we want to make sure that this keeps
Good kitty.
going. Yeah.
You're so pretty.
Exactly. So never underestimate
Okay.
that managing up, though, I think is really important, because it's true for all of us. When we've been doing something for a long time and it really defines who we are, it's hard to think of not doing it anymore. And as you said, one of the biggest roadblocks tends to be, even if I do go part-time and I'm there to help, well, I still like that everybody comes to me, and I still like that I can solve problems. And that's a tough thing to get out of the way. And so from a aspiring credit manager, being able to manage up and help to set those parameters and be very clear about what they are, and then revisit them every 6 to 8 months, I think is going to be really, really important, because things will change. And I think that it's really important to be very, very intentional and set very, quite honestly, rigid boundaries, so that everybody's aware of what's going on going forward. And then I think what it's incumbent upon is getting some buy-in from the department to come up with we talked about this earlier, what are those skills? Right? What are we looking for? Hey, Thea, if I'm going to come in and replace you, what skills do you have that have made you successful that we then need? Because then we can move you into a mentorship role. And that really helps to avoid the problem of, well, you're kind of half-time here, but really you're full-time.
you're kind of messing up the works is what's actually happening.
Yeah, exactly.
So would you recommend, like, maybe putting together, like, here's most companies have an org chart.
Yep.
And on that org chart, where you start maybe, putting like a template in for, here's who we kind of have slated, here's who we're training or bringing up. And I know a lot of lumber yards run, pretty lean, so they don't have maybe a secondary person,
Sure.
and then you look at, okay, what's the cost of bringing another person on to train them? Because, trying to find somebody that you're like, well, we're just going to hire someone, but I want an out of the box credit manager that, has all of these things, customer service skills, mechanics, lean knowledge,
Yeah.
this kind, all of these different things. And it's like, and I want to just
Yeah.
like plop them here. And it's like, even if I walked into your lumberyard tomorrow, there's going to be a learning curve, learning your
Yes.
customers, your salespeople, your company philosophies. So when do you start training that, and how are you able to help justify bringing another body in to train?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and this is where both managing up and managing down is important, and having those conversations and being comfortable having those conversations about different departments, because as the owner, right, if we go in and the first person who will contact us is going to be an owner, right? They're the ones who are thinking succession, right? I've got this asset. I need it for family legacy. I need it for my retirement, all of this stuff. But helping that person understand what the critical departments are, and then who are the critical people there, but then talking to them about the planning part. How do we actually set up a plan to move this from person A to person B, or even just to move some of those tasks, and over what period of time? And that can be accomplished a couple ways, but I think to get to your point, which is kind of about the money, right? If we're running lean and we're thinking bottom line here, we're going to have to do a little bit of thinking. Obviously, the easiest thing to do would be, we've got somebody great internally. They're already here, and we're gonna push them up the chain of command. Now, that isn't to say that there couldn't be somebody laterally, right?
Okay.
Looking across the company, there may be somebody that has skills to move into your
Well,
credit
who
as
wouldn't
well.
want to just go, hey, yeah, sign me up for that? Everybody wants this job. That's they're all fighting for it. But I so let's take another scenario though, where the owner's like, hey, I'm happy. We're going to continue moving along, but I need to start succession planning
Yeah.
for just roles in my company. And that's
Hmm.
where I see a lot of credit managers where I don't want to say they're aging out, but they're to the point in their career where they're ready to step out and
Yes.
go do their second or third act on life, and
Hmm.
just go do whatever. And they don't have somebody that they could put into that spot. And it's like, well, I've been telling you guys I'm leaving for a while now, and you guys didn't believe me. And now that I've got my coffee mug and my tchotchkes in a box under my arm, you guys are
Right.
like, oh, you were serious about that.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, yeah. And there's nobody in this chair, so I don't know what you guys are going to do here.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And a lot of times the owner doesn't want to think that that person's actually serious, and it's just, we all do it to a certain extent, right? It's hoping that we're wrong, and we've got a couple clients right now where that's the case, and the key employee has said, no, I'm actually really leaving, and so you need to solve this problem, and it might take a while to get through. But what I would say from an owner's perspective, or even as a department head, right? Because your job as running any department is to think about the longevity, the sustainability of that department. And what we often will tell these folks to do is, we call it a stoplight chart, right? Red, yellow, green, and list your tasks. And you could do it, we do an Excel spreadsheet where you have kind of your daily, your monthly, and maybe your less frequent ones. And you list them by, green are the things that would be very easy to pass off, that you do on a day-to-day basis. Yellow, a little bit harder. Red, the things that would are going to take time. And that can get people thinking about, what is this process going to look like? What can I unload right now, potentially, or in the next couple of weeks? Because part of it is just getting the process going. Right? It's hard for people to let go if they don't really understand what they're letting go towards, right? What's the greater goal here of letting go of some of these responsibilities? And a lot of times it's just breaking that logjam and seeing that, oh, okay, I passed these two tasks on. It didn't ruin my life. It didn't destroy the company. And I think and a lot of times it'll make them happier, that I'm not doing this stuff anymore. Oh, many times with owners, I feel like little things like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to take care of the hiring and firing anymore. I don't like to be the bad guy. So So
Okay, I hear that a lot though from the credit side of it, where they're like, oh, I don't want to tell the guy he's cut off. I'm like, I'll do
yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's like you know what? It's so much less emotional for when you do it every day for a living.
Right.
It really doesn't have the same impact. But I like the idea of like as a department head, even if I'm a department of one, I now have some sort of a roadmap that I can use where I'm going to start cataloging. I'm going to open that Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to start cataloging. Here are all the things that make up my day, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, once a year, whatever it is, and start looking at what exactly that is. And do I have a credit policy written out? Do I have clear procedures written out? Or have they been updated lately? So if I'm starting to think, hey, I'm starting to think about retirement, what is that going to look like for me? Then that gives me an opportunity to start laying the groundwork and start documenting that so that when I sit down with, the owner, the president, whoever, and go, listen, I'm really going to pull the plug. This is my year. End of the year, I'm bouncing. But here's all that I've done. The credit policy is up to date. All the procedures are up to date. This is what I've done. I've identified, here's some people within the company that I think have some skills for this. Here's what the attributes that you need. So there's a lot of stuff that as the owner of this job, this role, that I can do. And so those are some great ideas you had where it's like, that gives me something that I don't feel like I'm just at somebody else's mercy, that I
Yes.
have ownership of it.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part is that from the owner's perspective, you need to be thinking about who's key to the business, but from each department's perspective, they also have a key role to play in this, which is, as you so well articulated, thinking through how can I be part of the successful future of this company? And a great way to do that is by making sure that your department, whether you're a department of one or 100, has a plan in place that you can share with people, and also probably equally as important, that is understandable, so that even if we do have a little bit of a transition period and somebody has to step in from somewhere else, management, to help make sure that this is smooth, that they're not sitting there going, geez, what the heck was Thea doing here for the last 30 years? We don't really, I don't really, I wish I knew better now.
I don't really know what she did all day, but it was not anything spectacular. So, I know that I gave my view on when somebody says, well, I'll come in and work part-time.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've always been no, absolutely not, because that just muddies the water. Lately, though, I've had a little bit of change of heart where it's, listen, I think you could set up like a weekly meeting where, maybe we do a Zoom call or just a regular phone call. I don't need to look at you, but, just to go, hey, I had these questions. And instead of calling because everyone always says, oh, if you have any problems, just call me. It's like, I don't want to call you 15 times. How about I just, keep a little tab and maybe, we get together. And it also forces me to think things through. But, that could be another transition way. But what about when someone just really doesn't want to go, but it's time for them to go? And you're looking at and the owner and all of the people around you are going, look, you got to do something because it's time.
Yeah.
It's time to make a change.
Yeah,
How do you handle that, Sam?
Yeah, that one, that's always the tricky one, right? Especially if it's somebody who's been around for a long time and you respect them and you want to make sure that you're not creating any bad feelings. There I think it's two things to think about. Number one is, as the owner and as the other people who will stay on, going back and making sure that that department is tight with policies, tight with responsibilities, knowing who's going to take over what. And then it really is going to be incumbent upon your owner / leadership to sit down and have a very candid conversation and say, hey, look, we've looked at what you've done. You've put together a really great roadmap for us going forward. This is the timeline. And you're not going to cut them off at the end of the week. Hey, we've got till the end of 2025. We'd love to use your help for the next, 8 months or so. But within that time, here's what it's going to look like. We know which roles we have to offload. Here's who they're going to go to. And really, to get back to your point of the post transition weekly call, turning them into a mentor before they leave, I think is really key, because then you've got the ability for people to ask them those 15, 20 questions a day because they're still there. And then hopefully you cut down on the number they're going to have to ask when they finally do leave. So it's it's a year from now. Hopefully you've gotten a lot of the opportunity to do those interactions and answer some of those questions, as opposed to storing them all up and the person, it's the cliff. We don't want to do the cliff version. We want to do kind of the nice sloping beach version of all
True.
clothing. Yeah.
Well, and that's where, then it becomes also the customer conversation where you're handing off and you want it to be very seamless. So all of a
Yes.
sudden one day, they're talking to Susie, and then the next day it's like, yeah, Susie's out, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just her time. She just set them out.
Yeah.
You don't want it to seem like it was, because, and not that I think people are bad, but customers will use, in my experience, anything that they can to kind of, it's like, well, Susie said we could totally do this. And like,
Yeah.
I know Susie pretty good. And I can tell you right now, she did, I tell you what, let's call her up right now. Cause I know she's out gardening, but she's going to take this call because we want to call bullshit on you.
A big part of succession planning is just continuity planning. And it's not even about necessarily what if we're replacing so-and-so, we're replacing Susan. It's what happens if Susan is not able to, she gets stuck. She went to Europe on vacation and a volcano exploded in Iceland, but she can't get home. What are we going to do? And then all kinds of these things come up, but starting to think through some of this stuff, I think, is really important. And if you do it from the lens of continuity, a lot of times it removes some of the personal, because it's,
Okay.
they're not saying that Sam's old and he needs to leave.
No, that's a really good point. It's like, if I'm somebody that wants to bring this up to my leadership, like, I'm like, okay, I'm a party of one. I'm doing the work. I'm making my red, yellow, green chart. I'm,
Yep.
doing all of this. I'm updating all of my processes. I'm putting in all of this work. And now I go to, some of the leadership in my company, and it's like, guys, I think we really need to start talking about this. I don't want to sound like a ghoul, and I certainly don't, want to sound like, okay. And I'm not saying I'm leaving tomorrow, but this is really important stuff. And we've all worked so hard to get to this point. Wouldn't you just hate to see it just, be 86th because we didn't want to have hard conversations?
The issues that you end up running into, which is a point you brought up earlier, Thea, is around, if I'm not going to get the opportunity here, I'm going to start looking elsewhere. And that's how you start losing talent. And even if you have built up and you're using technology and you're thinking about next gen, if you don't have plans in place that are understandable to folks, and the department's not thinking through how we're going to transition from current head to future head, people are going to start looking around, and that's really hard for a company, because you can do a lot of things to keep a business going, but replacing good people is hard, and especially good people that know your business.
Well, it's getting harder.
Yeah.
I mean, it's realistically, okay. So if you were to say the three most important things when you're talking about succession planning, and whether that's talking to the owner, and maybe they're two different talk tracks,
Sure.
Or to the person who is maybe in the back of their head thinking, hey, this is a conversation I probably need to, start thinking about or having.
Yep.
What's your best advice to both of those people?
Yeah. Well, the number one piece of advice to both parties is start early, because these processes take longer than you think for any number of reasons. Emotion is obviously a big part of it, and just not really accepting reality, that those can take time to get over, but things happen, right? Just stuff comes up even in the day-to-day business. So starting earlier is always a good idea. And then within that, I think for both, again, number two would be take some time really to think about your role in the company and how it relates to the overall business of the company. And this is something that each of us can do as part of the company. We don't need anybody to tell us, hey, Thea, I really need you to go, as you said earlier, go write down what you do so that we can find somebody to come in here.
Well, that freaks people out where it's
Yes.
like, what did I miss a meeting? I'll bring
Right.
donuts next time. I promise. I mean, what did I
Yeah.
do wrong here?
Yeah. Right.
So
Don't get the broom yet. I'm still here. Yeah.
just, I see my stuff in my car. Is that a bad sign?
Yeah. But yeah, I think that, along with starting early, being proactive, I
Okay.
think both as an owner and as somebody in a department is good, because there are things you can do on your own that can help set the stage, and then it feels a little bit more in your control. And I think that's really important for people
Yeah.
it's really hard when you feel like you're just kind of getting whipped around because now
I
they're
think
doing
that's
this or
the
that.
biggest one. I love that piece of advice from you. I think that's out of all of this, my biggest takeaways were the red, yellow, green, and the taking ownership of it so that you feel that control piece, because that's where
Yeah.
most people lose their stuffing and freak out. They're like, you're
Yeah.
pushing me out. I was like, I'm not pushing you out, but realistically you're going to leave me at some point.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. And then I would say that for anybody is use the people around you, right? Don't be afraid to have conversations and ask people for advice and look for ways that they can help you and help the business grow, especially if you're the owner, but even in your own department. Or even looking laterally, there are people that you rely on, that you talk to every day. And again, I think all these ideas all come back to that baseline of being in control. But start early, make sure that you're doing what you can to drive this, and then make sure that you're being transparent. Communicate with people around you. Don't allow this to fester, because then you start making assumptions, and assumptions are always bad.
Well, then you build it up in your head. So Sam, if somebody needs to get a hold of you, how do they?
Yeah, so a couple different ways you can go on our website, right? stratusbusinessadvisors.com. That's a great way to get some resources, look at different case studies. You can always call the phone number. My phone number is 301-873-4602. I'm not going to charge you by the hour, so call me.
And we'll link all of this in the body so that you can just like click the link and follow. But
Yeah. So, but yeah, feel free to reach out. Happy to chat with people. The biggest thing is that you get started, and then of course, email, right, is another. Any of those ways are great ways to interact with us, and just feel free to reach out, and we're happy to have a conversation. Our goal is to get you thinking about this, because if you're thinking about it, it's more likely that you're actually going to do something about it.
well, it took me a while to do my will, but I had to think about it for like 2 solid years. But
Yeah,
then I
exactly.
finally got with the program. But Sam, thank you so much for being on board and for coming
My
in
pleasure.
and giving some really great information. And I think you've given some tools to really help the individual as well to go, okay, I may not own the place, but I do have ownership of this role because it's the job I do every day.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it. And no, it's my absolute pleasure, Thea. This has been great. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Well, we're going to have you back because I'm sure we'll have follow-up questions. We always do. And
Sure.
we're just going to treat you as a guest regular.
Excellent. Happy to do it.
Everybody, that wraps another episode of LBM Talks Credit. I'm Thea Dudley, your host. And if you have any questions, comments, want to get a hold of me, it's thea@creditoverlord.com, or you can certainly reach out operations@lbmjournal.com. And we will see you next time.